What is up? I'm Jared Harris, and you're listening to episode 23 of Beats by Jer. It feels like a while since I actually reviewed an album, a new album, on here while looking at its significance within an artist's own discography. Today we'll be digging deep into Dark Matter, the 12th studio album from Pearl Jam. I want to give a special shout out before we begin to the team at Universal Music Canada for the early access. I had a digital stream of the record about a week early for the purpose of reviewing it for the Spill magazine. It always remains a truly exciting moment to receive a highly anticipated album from a band you've loved for so long. To hear their music early, it's one of the best parts about what I do. Thank you, Universal Music Canada, and to the Spill magazine for hooking your boy up. 2024 has only seen a handful of albums that I've thoroughly enjoyed, one of which, Gary Clark Jr.'s JPEG Rob, may be the subject of a future episode. But Dark Matter comes from a unique place. As a lifelong Pearl Jam fan, this album was highly anticipated for myself. However, it also feels refreshingly surprising in that it is a clear departure in songwriting and production from their most recent string of albums. More of that later. With this idea in mind, however, the album is absolutely incredible and is their greatest since 2006, self-titled. Looking at articles, podcasts, and comments online, this seems to be the general consensus, although I've seen a number of people argue that Dark Matter is actually the best Pearl Jam has sounded since 1998's Yield. The songwriting and performance on Dark Matter is certainly reminiscent for that era, but I stand by my original claim simply because I love Riot Act and Binaural so much. Then again, if Dark Matter grows with time to surpass the self-titled, then it would be their best work, I think, since 2002. But for now, I'm going to say 2006. Dark Matter's greatest strength is that it sounds like a classic Pearl Jam album while also sounding like the band is breaking new ground. Through shifting the tone of their songwriting and production, the band has been able, impressively, to conjure an energy that has been less present in their modern work. However, through revisiting familiar territory, Pearl Jam has done so with the prowess of a veteran musical outfit, steeped with decades of experience as both performers and songwriters. Rather than ride a nostalgic wave for when the band was more grungy than they supposedly are now, they have simply found inspiration in an era long gone and have channeled that into a masterfully written, recorded, and produced record. Very much so, Dark Matter feels like the successor to Yield, and that's a good thing. The album is their first since 2020's Gigaton, which is the shortest gap between records since the 3 years between Pearl Jam and Backspacer, and was produced by Andrew Watt, making Dark Matter a rare occurrence within the lifespan of the band where they have not worked with producer and engineer Brendan O'Brien. Watt has come up a few times on this podcast and continues to demonstrate himself as one of the most vital producers of our time. While initially making a name for himself throughout the previous decade writing and producing pop stars, most notably including hits for Camila Cabello, Justin Bieber, Post Malone, Lana Del Rey, and Miley Cyrus, Watt has more recently turned his attention to rock music as he pursues some of his biggest heroes and inspirations. Since 2019, he has produced a pair of albums for Ozzy Osbourne, Ordinary Man, Patient Number 9, Iggy Pop's Every Loser, Elton John's The Lockdown Sessions, The Rolling Stones' Hackney Diamonds, and of course, Eddie Vedder's Earthling. While Dark Matter would not have any guests featured on the album, something that is signature to Watt's process, save a pool cue hitting a ball near the beginning of the opening song attributed to Sean Penn. Watt has an incredible Rolodex of artists whom he calls upon to make records with. For example, the rhythm section for much of his work with Ozzy and Pop was built around Guns N' Roses bassist Duff McKagan and Red Hot Chili Peppers drummer Chad Smith, and his records have seen additional featured artists including Stevie Wonder, Paul McCartney, Taylor Hawkins, Dave Navarro, Slash, Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, and Ringo Starr, among so many others. At this point, it almost seems like habit for Watt to collaborate and turn out a latter career highlight for a band. If we look at Watt's collaborators, it only seems logical that he would eventually come to work with Pearl Jam. Vedder's Earthling, released in 2022, was the first connection to surface from the Watt-Pearl Jam collaboration that would see Watt produce the first Vedder solo album since 2011's Ukulele Songs. Earthling stands as a modern rock album that teeters between punk rock explosions and alternative musings and a classic rock tone, greatly inspired by the likes of the greatest storytellers this genre has seen. The album feels like a breakthrough creatively for Vedder and was among my favorite releases of 2022. Following this, however, Watts would call on Mike McCready, the lead guitarist of Pearl Jam, to take a solo on Osbourne's Immortal, and the next year he would see Stone Gossard's on Iggy Pop's All the Way Down. It's almost as if, after cutting his teeth with Vedder, Watt felt he needed to further demonstrate his ability with McCready and Gossard in order to ensure that he got the job for the next Pearl Jam record. Furthermore, Dark Matter is supported by the inclusion of former Red Hot Chili Pepper guitarist Josh Klinghoffer. This would be the second time that an ex-Pepper would join Pearl Jam, the first being Jack Irons, who would drum on Vitalogy, No Code, and Yield. It's not like this trend has happened a lot, but it is weird that it's happened twice. At this point, Klinghoffer seems to be the guy for alt-rock sessions. While his work for the Peppers certainly suffered from a lack of Frusciante, both I'm With You and The Getaway, especially the latter of the two, are underrated examples of a more sleek and modern approach that found balance between pop and alt-rock. I like those records, especially The Getaway. That being said, Klinghoffer has remained busy since departing from the Chili Peppers by becoming an unofficial member for Pearl Jam on the road, filling in for additional guitars, keys, and percussion. On a few occasions, with no notice, he even performed entire sets in place of drummer Matt Cameron due to COVID. Watt actually recently spoke about the underrated and underassumed level of musical virtuosity that Klinghoffer brings. Additionally, he has also been a touring guitarist for Jane's Addiction, while also performing extensively across Iggy Pop's Every Loser and Vedder's Earthling, once again further connecting him to Watt. While challenging to discern what he has actually contributed to Dark Matter, he is listed in the credits as piano, keyboards, and guitar, and received a writing credit on Something Special. To understand the importance of Dark Matter, we need to understand the shift in Pearl Jam's sound, which has occurred from the 90s into the 2000s and then would evolve significantly in the past decade. From 91 to 94, 10 to Vitalogy, Pearl Jam were quintessentially grunge, whatever that means. 10 in particular stands as one of the most important and popular albums of its time, a true snapshot of a generation. With songs like Even Flow, Alive, Black, and Jeremy, 10 would make an immediate critical impact and would slowly begin to sell, breaking into the top 10 a year after its release and peaking at number 1, a spot the band would hold for 4 years. The album would continue to sell more and more over the years, quite interestingly even outselling the following album from Pearl Jam, Versus, in 93, and in that same year outselling Nirvana's Nevermind, which, like 10, was also released in 91. 10 would eventually go on to be over 13 times platinum, making it among the greatest selling albums of the decade. With grunge in vogue, this was a common theme for some of Seattle's biggest bands, and each handled their massive breakthroughs differently. Nirvana would follow Nevermind with In Utero, an album almost designed to alienate their mainstream audience, something I discussed at length in episode 14. Soundgarden would surpass Bad Motorfinger by doubling down on their ambitions to deliver their opus, Super Unknown. Alice in Chains would struggle under the weight of Dirt, which likely further perpetuated Lane Staley's addictions and withdrawals from the public. However, they would eventually return with the creatively energized Jar of Flies, which would see them take a vastly different direction, trading sludgy riffs for acoustic musings. And Pearl Jam would resurface with 1993's Versus. Versus is a unique case study among the Big Four simply because it sounds stylistically similar to 10. It is very much a grunge album. However, the band sounds much less interested in making hits and instead turned towards juxtaposing influences, punk rock and acoustic folk. The resulting album is, in my opinion, their strongest and sees the band divert their attention from overt hooks and choruses and, in turn, dig deep into their roots to deliver an album that is both blistering and emotionally driven. Similar to Nirvana, Pearl Jam rejected their status as one of America's biggest bands. However, they didn't seek to alienate their audience to such a degree. Instead, Versus is a compelling record that shines for its depth in both performance and songwriting. 1999's Vitology would see the band further stray from the Seattle sound, further diverging from what the mainstream would assume to be grunge, and arguably is their last truly grunge album. While the following No Code, released in '96, would hold on to some of this, like Vitology before it, Pearl Jam were clearly departing from the social expectations of the genre. Yield, Binaural, and Riot Act would see the band further experiment with softer textures alongside punk rock and occasionally employing a more classic rock feel to their music. By this point, their music felt much more alternative, not in the sense that it fit the mold of late 90s, early 2000s alt rock, but that it was alternative from the modern mainstream rock of the time, a sound which was desperately trying to capture the sounds of the early 90s alternative and grunge boom. The 2006 self-titled, sometimes called the Avocado album, marks a dramatic shift towards radio-friendly sound. Not so much in sound, the band was still throwing out a range of ballads and hard rockers that teetered towards punk rock, but more so in production. The record was significantly more polished and clean, with Vedder's vocals brought right to the front, something which the band had seemingly intentionally avoided in the past, which often resulted in Vedder sounding as though he was competing with the band, something which gave them a much more raw approach, as though they were recording live off the floor. This also speaks to the idea of Vedder further rejecting the role of being a voice for the generation and acting against his own fame. The production on Pearl Jam would mark a trend that would follow for the next three albums, Backspacer, Lightning Bolt, and Gigaton, the trio of modern Pearl Jam albums that feel more palatable to the mainstream. Again, the songwriting and performance remained distinctly Pearl Jam, but the production certainly dulled their teeth. Even some of their most abrasive songs from the modern era, Mind Your Manners and Can't Deny Me, sound compressed, prioritizing Vedder's vocals and giving the band a much more polished and leaner sound. Gigaton fits this mold, but remains dangerously underrated, as the band at rare moments felt as though they were experimenting. And I applaud any band that seeks an experimental sound, but especially when an artist is so deep into their career that they don't actually need to experiment and that they're clearly doing so out of their own creative interest. There are fleeting moments where it sounded as though Pearl Jam were seeking new soundscapes, and I wish they'd explored them further on that record. Despite this, there's a level of consistency that Pearl Jam operates with, and despite the criticism this era fairly received, one cannot deny the band as a songwriting tour de force. This is where Watt's role as a producer was central to the sound of Dark Matter. A common trend with the records Watts has produced, particularly with veteran artists, is that he's able to channel an era fans thought long gone. Iggy Pop's Every Loser, for example, harkens back to the latter days of the original Stooges run, as well as his first two solo albums made in conjunction with David Bowie. While Hackney Diamonds, the first original album from the Rolling Stones in 18 years, captures a tone the band hasn't had since the late 70s. Dark Matter greatly succeeds due to Watt's ability to push artists to channel ideas and energy or vibe that echo a previous era. This is what often makes his collaborations such exciting affairs. It's thrilling to hear a band that you love revisit one of their greatest periods with the benefit of experience and practice they've gained since. Sometimes, this can be attributed to his tendency to bring guests into the studio. However, we know that is not, in fact, the case with Dark Matter. Others attribute it to the sound of his work, as Watt has curated a collection of vintage gear. With Vedder working with him on Earthlings, he actually told the rest of Pearl Jam to not bring their typical instruments, encouraging them to give Watt's vintage collection a try. The result is an album that sounds phenomenal, and while I don't know how much of their own gear they actually use, if they brought certain favorites to use in conjunction with his work, his material, his amps, effects, guitars, whatever. I don't know how much of a a distinction there is between Pearl Jam's gear and Watts, but the album sounds phenomenal, much like the rest of Watts' recent work. Others, however, simply attribute this to his fan first mentality when working with such artists. In an Instagram post celebrating the release of Dark Matter, Watt himself shared to go from a fan in the crowd holding a sign that said, "Let me play the guitar solo to Alive," to being in the room collaborating with the musicians who made you who you are, feels like a far cry from reality. Listening to his work with Vedder, Pearl Jam, Ozzy Osbourne, Iggy Pop, it's hard not to ignore this fan first mentality. And it's like Watt walks into a room and has an idea for a sound, and it's a sound or an inspiration that the band that he's working with hasn't actually actively channeled in a long time, and he uses that almost like as a starting point as to what direction they should take. And so far it's proved to be incredibly effective. Whatever his secret is, Dark Matter benefits from the presence of Watt as a producer. Pearl Jam sound the most energized in the studio than they have in years, but their sound remains massive, something that has, again, been absent in recent productions. The record sounds huge, flexing a muscular tone of dense arrangements, lush harmonies and melodies, and ferocious guitars. On all accounts, Dark Matter is a revitalizing record that is highly reminiscent of their late 90s sound, specifically that of Yield. So let's look at the actual lead up towards Dark Matter. I spent much time in the past detailing massive campaigns used to promote a record that benefit from an abundance of tools ranging from singles, videos, interviews, vinyl variants, live performances, and more, to create an all-encompassing release cycle that pulls the fan into something that feels far greater than just another release. In traditional Pearl Jam fashion, though, this is not the case for Dark Matter, and it only works because this is the Pearl Jam way. To do more would feel like a compromise on their convictions, and Pearl Jam, perhaps more so than any other artists, are nothing without their convictions. This is best seen through a look back at the band's history, through a specific pair of examples where Pearl Jam took on the music industry at a truly pivotal time in their career. While within 2 years of the release of 10, Pearl Jam would establish themselves among the biggest bands of the decade, they were still only one record deep into their career. No matter how big 10 was, they existed within a fragile state, a point of make or break. Much like Nirvana, Pearl Jam would actively work against the fame that was bestowed upon them. Vedder, in particular, refused to engage in anything that would further separate himself from his fans. It is such a transparent allegiance demonstrated that has become foundational in the relationship between the band and their audience. 10 saw the band release 4 singles, each with a music video from July 1991 to December of 92. While Alive and Even Flow were obvious choices for singles and would become among the most enduring hits from the band, the music video for Jeremy would be among their most resonating pieces, in which the band documented adolescent bullying that results in the victim coming to school and shooting himself in front of his peers, as was depicted in the lyrics, something which Vedder had apparently read in a newspaper and turned into song. The video remains starkly striking in its depiction of suicide, and given its success on MTV, Epic Records would push the band for another video, which they would push back against themselves, eventually delivering one for Oceans, a fantastic ballad, but an intentionally offbeat choice, almost as though Pearl Jam would only capitulate in a less conventional way, opting for Oceans in place of a more single-friendly song of the likes of Black, Once, or Why Go. While the whole band was not necessarily against music videos, Vedder longed for a time when you could hear a song for the first time and create your own visual links to it, rather than forever having a song visually connected with a specific piece of promotional material. Furthermore, they felt that the format of MTV was making albums and to a greater extent music, both highly commercialized and expendable. As such, Pearl Jam would not release any more music videos throughout the 1990s until 2006. And while they have released a handful since then, they are often very minimal productions and largely used only for the initial single or two. In refusing to release any more music videos, Pearl Jam took a massive risk at such a critical time in their career, a time where it was truly make or break for themselves, and a time where what was on MTV was king. But it spoke to who they were as artists in a way that only further connected them to their audience. This was later seen through the band's public boycott and legal challenges against Ticketmaster, something which, given the state of the ticketing industry today, they were far ahead of their time. During their 94 tour, the band clearly outlined that their tickets would cost $18, which would include the service fee of $1.80. And seeing that Ticketmaster were adding additional fees, with some premium seats seeing fees equal to that of the ticket value, they took them to court on the grounds of breaching contract, but also challenging them as a monopoly. The band would go on to tour using alternative ticketing agencies. However, this would limit their ability to tour, as Ticketmaster had, and still does, exclusivity with most mid to large sized venues in North America. In doing such, Pearl Jam took a stand for their audience, intentionally knowing that they would have to perform at significantly smaller venues, once again demonstrating a level of dedication to their audience very early in their career. Pearl Jam would lose the case against Ticketmaster, and unfortunately, now more than ever before, Ticketmaster remains absolutely inescapable. Given this history, it is no surprise then that Pearl Jam sought a minimal lead up to Dark Matter. The album was preceded by a set of 3 singles, the title track, Running, and just days before the release, Wreckage. The singles were paired with digitally created visualizers in place of music videos, echoing the past and likely created just to have a visual element in order to put singles on their YouTube channels. And while the band would release numerous vinyl variants, this was done in a minimalist manner compared to the likes of their peers, and was likely done in a way to celebrate Record Store Day, which was held on April 20th, one day after the release of Dark Matter. Pearl Jam were Record Store Day's 2019 ambassadors and further demonstrate their commitment to supporting independent record stores, labels, and businesses, something which keeps them grounded in their punk grassroots roots. This is furthered by the global listening parties where fans headed to local independent record stores to hear Dark Matter a week early, including one in Toronto at Dine Alone Records. The release date remains further evidence of the minimalism Pearl Jam exude in the context, as April 19th was also the release of Taylor Swift's The Tortured Poets Department, an album which would become Spotify's fastest record to reach 1 billion streams, while also beating Swift's own records for the most streamed album in a single day across nearly all streaming platforms. Curiously, both The Tortured Poets Department and Dark Matter were released on Republic Records, a department of Universal Music that Pearl Jam uses as a global distributor for their own label, Monkey Wrench Records. This was the musical equivalent of Barbieheimer, something which I would joke about on the day of, only to later see Pearl Jam share a meme declaring the same thing on their Instagram stories. All of this connects to their role as a legacy band in size, but not in practice. Pearl Jam can, and have, embarked on sold-out arena tours without an album to promote. They very well could ride out on the hits of yesteryears, but choose not to. Looking at their set lists will show you that no show is quite the same. Vedder himself keeps extensive track of what the band has played in every city for years to ensure that each show on the tour is different from one another, but also does not resemble that of previous shows within the same touring market. I once saw the band perform all of Binaural in concert in 2016, an album known for more for its deep cuts and atmospheric tone. Another time, in 2022, they opened their show with a series of slower acoustic songs before transitioning into a full-on rock set. The result is a series of sites dedicated to archiving set lists, and have even led to some superfans calculating the odds that certain songs will appear at tonight's show. You truly never know what you'll get at a Pearl Jam show or who may show up, and while Binaural may not have been a crowd favorite for most, There's a thrill to knowing that whatever you get will be a concert experience unlike anything else they'll do. Between this and Pearl Jam's continuous dedication to their fans, they have built an incredible audience that seems just as dedicated to the band as they are to them, creating a true community of a fan base. Joanne Penderwick stated it best in an article for Pop Matters. A rock star who behaves moderately is better to love and even hitch your identity to than the one you suspect may sleep with underage women and launches into rageaholic outbursts and generally takes whatever he can from whomever he can. She then goes on to compare the Pearl Jam ethos to the paternal, all-around good guy identity of Dave Grohl. You could say that it doesn't get any better than that. However, due to its size and enduring loyalty, it is easy to put Pearl Jam into the legacy band category, but this would be unfair to their artistry, as best demonstrated through Dark Matter. And with that, let's actually talk about this record. Dark Matter is an album that sees some of the most hard-hitting of songs the band has written since 2006 emerge alongside emotionally driven ballads and classic rock touchstones. The push and pull between these elements across the record, even between moments on the same track, is one of the most central aspects to the Pearl Jam sound. Both dynamics are performed with an equal level of conviction in both the songwriting and performances, something that few artists can do so consistently throughout their career. Furthermore, the album showcases the band as an absolute powerhouse in a way that has been largely absent from recent records. Vedder at times feels as though his voice is drowning alongside an array of guitars, keys, and drums, making the band sound as though they are recorded live off the floor, face to face in the same room. As a result, Vedder sounds as though he's belting viscerally to be heard, sounding as good as ever. It is such a production that gives the album its raw and tenacious energy while delivering enough grit that it doesn't feel too clean and polished. As a result, the guitars have an immense amount of room to breathe. It is worth noting that the chemistry between McCready and Gossard is among the best in any band and is in full display across almost every song on the album. The two never seem to step on each other's toes while dancing around one another and the rest of the band. While McCready stands largely as the lead guitarist, both fill the roles of rhythm and lead simultaneously, ebbing and flowing without signaling. Their ability to weave rhythm and lead parts around each other is perhaps best heard on this album, denoting a sense of depth in their ability to play off one another without getting in the other's way, something which has been foundational to their dynamic since their debut. On Dark Matter, this has only gotten better and greatly enriches the album. Such a dynamic puts them in line with some of the greatest guitar duos of all time. I'd put McCready and Gossard beside Keith Richards and Mick Taylor or Ronnie Wood, as well as Slash and Izzy Stradlin. Then add Vedder and Klinghoffer into the mix, and the record is a guitar-heavy album. On top of this, the tones and effects are carefully curated. The record sounds phenomenal, and that is largely due to Watt's contributions. Additionally, McCready is absolutely shredding across the album. For years, I have referred to him as one of the most underrated guitarists ever, if it's actually possible to remain underrated as a stadium band. His range is among the most versatile while channeling a style highly reminiscent of some of the greatest guitar heroes of the 60s and 70s. McCready is among the greatest of his generation, regularly blending punk and classic rock influences and beyond. On multiple occasions, McCready's solos are used to escalate the tension and excitement of a track as the band enters the final chorus or outro, sometimes leaving him to shred in the background underneath the rest of the band. McCready sounds absolutely masterful on Dark Matter, making it among his best collections of work as a performer. And of course, while looking at the performances on the album, I'd be remiss not to talk about drummer Matt Cameron. Long before Dark Matter, when the record existed only as a rumor that McCready had discussed in an interview, he praised Cameron's drumming, saying it was some of the most complex he's heard from him since Soundgarden. This, of course, is something that left me very excited. Cameron's work with Soundgarden is exceptional, and while he stands as Pearl Jam's longest-running drummer, their steadiest and most consistent drummer, he's occupied a supporting role for the band behind songs, only occasionally flashing his chops until now. Previously, due to their recorded performances, both Dave Abruzzi's and Jack Irons appeared to be more exciting drummers, while Cameron came in providing a more stable approach. Dark Matter, on the other hand, sees him regularly in the driver's seat, shifting the pulse in and out of half and double time and playing the most intricate meter shifting fills he's yet to do with Pearl Jam. Again, speaking to the live energy the album has, it seriously feels, more often than not, that Cameron is leading the charge with the rest of the band keeping pace. Through these performative strengths, Dark Matter is a record that shines beyond the songwriting, but demands the listener to recognize the cohesion and power of Pearl Jam as a unit and as individual members. With that, let's look at Dark Matter, track by track. Opening with Scared of Fear, Pearl Jam sound larger than life, mirroring the scale of their landmark debut, 10. The song is a whirlwind of crunching riffs, a driving chorus, and a pair of shredding guitar solos, while Vedder waxes poetics on Mourning a Life Long Gone, something most, if not all of us, can resonate with. There's an element of Scared of Fear that feels reminiscent for Rearview Mirror, while embracing the chord-heavy direction Pearl Jam has adopted over the last decade. The song does a fantastic job at setting the tone for the album while raising the bar and stoking the fire with a first song that feels distinctive from the criticism that most modern Pearl Jam records have faced. React Respond, on the other hand, is an up-tempo track delivered at a brisk pace with an unwavering punk energy to it. The interplay between guitarist McCready and Gossard and bassist Jeff Ament shines particularly in the verses. This is not only one of the greatest examples of the previously discussed chemistry between McCready and Gossard, but we see Ament get in on it too. The chemistry between the three of them is palpable. The arrangement is worth noting, with the opening riff returning in a slinkier version played on just one string after the first chorus, only to return following the final chorus before the solo. This time, absolutely massive in tone and how it's layered. Cameron here also brings the frenetic pace of the chorus down to a halftime just for the riff itself before quickly abandoning that feel in place of a double time for the solo. Additionally, McCready's solo on the track is super brief and really goes back to that sort of 93 sound. There's such an urgency to React Respond that makes me think of Go from Verses. Tonally, the three of them sound incredible, with an array of complementing tones that feel curated and honed. React Respond stands as not only one of the strongest tracks on Dark Matter, but one of the greatest hard rockers from Pearl Jam since 2006. Wreckage comes along as the final single for the album. The track feels a lot safer compared to the previous two songs and other singles. There's an element of familiarity that likens this to Tom Petty, I would say. It's not quite a ballad, but a mid-tempo, middle-of-the-road rocker that feels inspired by 70s classic rock. The chorus is such a hook that really just feels like something Petty and the Heartbreakers would write. The soundscape, despite feeling safer, is lush, with guitars and subtle vocal harmonies from Cameron. It's such a direction that few artists could navigate without feeling as though they were aimless. It's that weird sort of mid-tempo, no riff, not quite soft, but not a hard rocker feel to it. This really demonstrates Pearl Jam's ability as songwriters and performers to take a song like Wreckage and deliver it without faltering their intention and conviction. By no means is this the most exciting song on Dark Matter, but you certainly won't want to skip it either. Dark Matter, the title track and lead single, dropped about 2 months ago. I remember initially hearing it and being absolutely stoked for the record. The song hits hard with a simple but sludgy riff. The production was an immediate departure from their most recent sound with Brendan O'Brien on their last couple records. Dark Matter came as a welcomed first listen, and since then, upon extensive listening, it stands as a much more nuanced track than you may have originally thought, especially from the guitars. The tones and effects are phenomenal, and upon first listen, it sounds as though the guitars and bass are entirely locked together in unison, but subtly behind in the mix, there are a lot of lead lines from McCready, Gossard, and Ament. Way back in the mix, someone is playing a tremolo effect with a slight delay, and it straight up sounds like a Decepticon. So that's rad. Dark Matter is a clear choice for the first single due to its aggressive sound, and despite loving this track, I was surprised by the rest of the album, which features much more depth to it than the initial single demonstrates. And most interesting, the album itself, for the most part, if not all the way through, surpasses the singles that they chose, which is a really interesting phenomenon. The next song is Won't Tell. This is where some of that depth that exceeds the singles comes in. The song is driven by an incredible verse. It's sort of jangly, a lot of chords, a lot of layered guitars that are working rhythmically against each other. Vedder's melodies are fantastic. The guitars sound incredible, but the song opens right up into this uplifting chorus. There's a darker tone to the song, and at the same time, it's a bit poppy in some ways, alongside that sort of grittiness that comes with the verse. And it features a great bridge before going into a soaring outro illuminated by Vedder and an array of guitars. Maybe it's just because it's sandwiched between Dark Matter and Upper Hand, but I keep forgetting about this song. And every time I see it come up with the title Won't Tell, I go, what is this one again? And as soon as that verse comes in, I am immediately reminded just how great of a song it is. I wouldn't necessarily say it's in the top 3 on the album for myself, but it is one of the stronger songs for sure. Upper Hand, on the other hand, is one of my favorite songs on the record. This is an incredibly reflective song, starring Vedder as once again, the reluctant voice of a generation, looking down the road at what's left to come. The first verse captured this perfectly with the lyrics reading, "The distance to the end is closer now than it's ever been. Roads we've traveled far, all the lights and sights we saw, no room left on the pages. We filled them up and painted some. Though the book, it may never be read, by anyone, anyone but me." The verses are ambient, almost melancholic, but behind the arpeggiated guitars and Vedder's vocals is McCready with one of his best guitar deliveries of the modern era, highly reminiscent of his Hendrix-inspired Yellow Ledbetter. The chorus grows to an uplifting level, and the final refrain of the chorus where Vedder goes, "Oh, but something that I never had was the upper hand," is single-handedly one of my favorite moments on the album. His vocal delivery is perfect. The melody is so unique, so catchy. It's a hook, and an absolute hook, and between that and McCready's guitars in the verse, you don't tend to see elements like this in more reflective ballads of this nature. And of course, I'm hesitant to even call it a ballad, given how the chorus and outro take shape. But I think it really speaks to the band as songwriters. After the final chorus is a soaring refrain. Vedder's belting these sustaining melodies, and he's at the front of the mix, but it sounds as though he's pushing himself up there in spite of the growing guitars, the solo, and Cameron kicking the song into liftoff with the double time feel. This is immediately followed with another song that left me stunned. Waiting for Stevie is another favorite of mine. Perhaps my favorite song on the record, but if not, my second favorite. The song goes back to when Vedder was working on Earthlings and was waiting none other than Stevie Wonder to arrive. Wonder would perform harmonica on Try, the 10th song on Earthling. Waiting for Stevie is driven by a swaying guitar line that counters an incredible vocal melody. Again, the tones are fantastic. The performance is amazing. It's uplifting, but a bit grungy. It's got a bit of that Soundgarden Searching with My Good Eye Closed vibe in the guitar tone, particularly in the verse. Cameron delivers one of his best fills in his entire time with the band before kicking down the door into the outro. It's this meter shifting fill that displaces the beat and then displaces it once again. It sounds simple on the surface, but when you actually count it out, it's a really cool fill. The song has this super 90s alternative vibe. You could hear it beside Vitology, and it just feels like a bit of a journey before a jam over the outro. Similar to Upper Hand and Wreckage, there is a vibe to this song that no one else could have written and performed. Waiting for Stevie. It sits in that niche that Pearl Jam have perfected. Again, continuing that 90s theme, the song ends and it doesn't actually end. There is an additional piece that is almost ambient, meditative, closing with Vedder repeating, "Be mighty, be humble, be mighty humble." It speaks back to the mantra of react, respond, the second song on the album, and really just speaks to the kindness and care Pearl Jam are known for. Chris Colonna and Ethan Shalloway talk about this on episode 161 of the Grunge Bible podcast and discuss that there is a sense of gratitude across Dark Matter, lyrically, and furthermore, how they approach the arrangements and how a lot of the songs feel really uplifting in the choruses and outros. And it really perfectly, what they talk about perfectly encapsulates what's going on here at the end of Waiting for Stevie. The Grunge Bible podcast is a really cool podcast overall. Definitely check it out. They're fantastic. And I really enjoyed the insight that they brought along to Dark Matter. Returning back to the song itself, I think we'd all benefit from being mighty, we'd all benefit from being humble, and we'd all certainly benefit from being mighty humble. Running is another up-tempo track just over 2 minutes in length, and it's just about as punk as Pearl Jam can be this deep into their career. It's another obvious choice for a single, and despite feeling fairly safe in its structure, Vedder is biting in his lyrics. Hearing this back to back with Waiting for Stevie, I am left pondering whether I prefer Vedder as the reflective elder statesman waxing poetics or as the scathing punk. There isn't too much to Running beyond that. It's a quick knockout punch, and it's crucial for the pacing for the back half of Dark Matter. Something Special is a track that comes along with a gentle swing. It's not country, nor is it the blues, but it's a tender, almost ballad, again, kind of approaching that Tom Petty inspiration. What shines brightest is the lyrics. It seems like it's a love letter from Vedder to his daughter, with lyrics like, "And it's okay should this life knock you down, the twisted wheel, you know it keeps on spinning round, bet on yourself, your number's oh so special, and when it gets fucked up and you need a helping hand, do it yourself, you're not the type to need a man. But if you find one, he'd better know you're damn special." And again, the final verse reads, "Oh, and if the night grows long and you're not feeling loved, I'll be there, and not 'cause it's my job. I work for free. You're both so special." The song itself it's just a really sweet song. It's such a tender moment between father and daughter. And again, like it's just an emotionally driven song that's not quite a ballad, and I'd be hard pressed to name another band that could have written a song like this that can stand on its own on such a record as Dark Matter. The penultimate song, Got to Give, is another mid-tempo rocker aided by an uplifted chorus. The lyrics sound like it's aimed at the loss of love, the end of a relationship, but I can't help but read certain lyrics and draw parallels to the loss of Chris Cornell and make that connection, that inseparable, incredible friendship and that creative relationship that Vedder and Cornell shared. And of course, when you actually read The lyrics, it does sound like the end of a relationship, but there are just a few key lines throughout the song that leave me thinking beyond the surface. Some of them read, I saw the doctor, said I'm falling apart. This heartbreak connection, all the blood dried up. Said he could have fixed it, had to open me up just like you. And I can't stand it because it's no way to live. The pain of this every day has got to give. Give me liberty or give me death over you. I think songs like this and Wreckage and Something Special really see Pearl Jam assume that veteran role in their songwriting, pulling more overtly from their influences that have usually been more subtle. There's a lot of Tom Petty on these songs, a big Neil Young and Crazy Horse energy to them. And again, this is a tone in songwriting and performance that's just hard to do. The songs themselves are so simple, and yet few could write them, and even less could perform them in a way that maintains the simplicity without feeling monotonous. I've used the word a few times in this episode, and it really is the conviction that the band has that likens them to these previous artists, to some of the greatest storytellers and narrative painters that music has seen. In terms of connecting it to their previous work, Got to Give also feels like the most direct throwback to Yield, making it another great track on the record. The album closes with Setting Sun, which is a largely acoustic song until the close. It's reflective, it's a moment of peace set over acoustic guitars, light percussion, and airy keys. It's almost folk. There's a little bit of. It feels like a purely Vedder composition. There's something to it beyond the title that connects Setting Sun with the energy of Big Hard Sun. Vedder's vocals are fantastic. I love the descending harmonic progression in the chorus, and without fully coming to life, there is a rise to the energy as the song expands greatly following the second chorus, transitioning into an entirely different vibe. Cameron is actually playing a full kit rather than the ambient percussive sounds. There's a melodic guitar line, and Vedder's vocals are straining to keep up with the swelling volume of this bridge. There's a sense of intensity despite the overall calming tone of the song, and it really is the perfect closer for the record. Consequentially, Dark Matter is certainly, without a doubt, Pearl Jam's best work since their 2006 self-titled, making for a latter career hit, something which, as we know, is Andrew Watt's thing. His production not only inspired the band, but has created a sound that sees Pearl Jam return to fighting shape, making for a triumphant return to form that feels like it was nearly 20 years in the making. While at the moment I'm unsure as to where it falls in the pantheon of their catalog in terms of quality, by the very nature of it feeling reminiscent of Yield, that is enough to put Dark Matter among their strongest of albums. There is a range to their sound on the record, making it one of their most versatile releases to date. I think it really speaks to the idea that while they have a highly distinct sound, you never really know what you're going to get from a Pearl Jam album, much like a Pearl Jam concert. What I've enjoyed most about Dark Matter is how nuanced the arrangements, instrumentation, and performances are. I feel as though with every listen, I'm finding something new. Without a weak moment across its 11 songs, key moments stand above an impressive album, including Scared to Fear, React Respond, Dark Matter, Upper Hand, Waiting for Stevie, and Setting Sun. As I continue to compare the album to 1998's Yield, and as I champion Watt's ability to bring artists back to a previous era, it must be stated that Pearl Jam have done so with the taste of a veteran band. Rather than plunder their audience under the guise of nostalgia, Dark Matter is simply reminiscent. By channeling the past, Pearl Jam have done so with decades of songwriting and performance experience, which has allowed for them to capture the energy and spark of their late 90s output and turn into a new, revitalizing direction. Despite feeling reminiscent, Dark Matter captures a thrill of being entirely new and fresh. A sense of danger has returned to Pearl Jam as they embark on the twists and turns of Dark Matter unflinchingly, their teeth once again sharpened. The band has emerged entirely recharged. With a minimal follow through, which saw the band make their debut on Howard Stern for a 2 hour in studio performance and interview, along with their upcoming tour, Pearl Jam appeared to already be looking to the future. On a recent episode of Kyle Meredith with Stone Gossard spoke about how the band is already looking forward to working on new music, attributing this to Watt and how it lit a spark under the band. While Pearl Jam will hit the road for much of the rest of the year, the prospect of a follow-up in the works is truly exciting, hopefully making Dark Matter the beginning of a brand new and thrilling era for Pearl Jam. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Join me in 2 weeks for a brand new one. I'm Jared Harris, and this is Beats by Jer.